is an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering The Veiled Throne, Book 3 in the Dandelion Dynasty series, Chapters 34 and 35, The Blossom Gang, and Know Thy Enemy. In these chapters, after lamenting last episode how bleak and devastating so much had been in a row, it was really nice to have these low stakes, seemingly at least, chapters where we're just dealing with some restaurant on restaurant drama. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Kyle for commissioning this episode. So, yeah, I mean, the intro says it all. I was really expecting that we were going to have a lot more heartbreak in these chapters. And instead, we get very, I won't say like chill chapters, but in comparison to what they have been, they did feel chill. And we also get like the little guy sort of coming out on top for a moment. And it feels like maybe on their way to coming out on top in a bigger sense later on. So all of that I am really excited about. And I'm also extremely curious about this basically like human trafficking thing that seems to be happening here with Liuku people involved. I am not certain what this is about. Like, I'm going to wait and theorize on that once I get to that part in the summary. But I have some real questions about it. So let's start off chapter 34. We begin in the midst of a busy lunch at the Splendid Urn. And we have got this customer that shows up. First, we have Farah show up, and she is going by the name Dandelion, as we find out later, which I kind of enjoy how obvious that name seems to me, but how much I can definitely appreciate that a person who would never in a million years expect the princess, why would it ever enter their head that that's why she chose this name, you know? And it turns out, and I had not put this together, I can't remember if anybody mentioned in the chat last time, and I have just forgotten since then, but Widow Wasu, who owns the Splendid Urn, is the same woman who ran the place that she had in, what was it, Dasu? Is that the city that she originally started off in? Where Kuniguru got his start, and he still owes her money. So Farah brings a big purse of gold with her to pay his debt off. And I have got to say, Kuni, I am disappointed in you that you didn't pay your debt off to her. You kind of owe her in a few ways, if I recall correctly. And it would have behooved you, I think, to have done right by her a while back. But regardless, I like the idea that maybe Kuni did pay her back. And his daughter was like, oh, I'll pay her back because I know that she deserves some more money and she's not going to accept it unless I frame it as being owed. So she just gives her this, and the woman is like, yeah, all right, I won't mention the fact that he paid me back. I don't think she would do that, to be perfectly honest. She seems like she has enough pride that she would say if she wasn't owed anything further. But that's going to be my headcanon because I just don't like the idea that Kuni left this woman with a tab running. So Kinri, this is the young woman whose horse he helped to calm in the last chapter. And it's very clear from the way that Wasu comes running out and is just falling all over herself in front of this young woman, that she is somebody of great importance. They have never seen her come running this quick for anybody. And the fact that she can't even be prevailed upon to not call her by her titles, which, despite coming very close to saying princess and your highness, Kinry is still not putting two and two together. It all adds up to, like, this is clearly somebody really important. So I love this. Widow Wasu tried to bow to the young woman several more times until Dandelion threatened to kneel down in front of her, in front of everyone. Only then did Widow Wasu reluctantly straighten up. She barked orders for servants to clean out the best suite of rooms in the owner's residence for Supreme Mistress Dandelion, and insisted that the kitchen prepare special meals for her 6 times a day. Look how all the walls of my establishment are glowing just from your presence. After Dandelion told Widow Wasu what had happened at Temple Square, the old mistress thanked Kinry profusely for his bravery and for bringing honor to the splendid urn. She gave him a bonus equivalent to 2 months' wages, and dispatched a team of footmen to find the actor, to give him his reward, and to invite him and his friends to come to the splendid urn for a meal. All the waiters and waitresses clapped Kinry on the shoulders to congratulate him. I love this so much. It's just continually being shown to Kinry how these, like, folks are good-hearted and give a shit about him, and the fact that he's being rewarded for doing something like this. It just warms my heart. I'm like, Kinry obviously is a good kid, you know? And we knew that he was just so privileged and sheltered and foolish because he didn't really understand the consequences of what was happening. But he never seemed like a bad child. It seemed like he was actually the opposite. And it was simply the thing that happens when you have a lot of privilege and you just can't quite understand that other people you can't shield them the way that you expect to be able to do because you've always gotten your way regarding everything, you know? So getting to see him taken in by this group and the way he responds to it is just sweet and wholesome in this way I wasn't expecting at all. So he's clearly, like, kind of in love with Farah, and she, as we find out when we're in her POV, is a little bit into him as well already, and Kinry seems genuinely to not understand what's going on with him. He keeps on being, like, drawn to her, flustered by her, and he's asking himself, like, why am I responding this way? With a sense of genuine puzzlement, like he has never had a crush before in his life, which he maybe hasn't. So it's a really fresh new thing happening to him. We know that Farah has flirted with boys before, so, like, you know, she has been in this kind of position, but it's very much a new thing for him. So this customer shows up. This man in his 30s. It's his description. His expensive water silk robe, bright blue with a thick border of golden threads, looked far too ostentatious for the tasteful plain bamboo walls of the splendid urn. A pair of sharp, narrow eyes peeked out of an oily and fleshy face, and a thin excuse for a mustache curled above his lip like a fuzzy caterpillar. The overall effect was of an arrogant man who was used to having others cater to his whims. And he summons Kinry over and makes this big production of how this fish soup is horrible. It tastes like it's gone rancid. The pipe scallions that you used are rotting, and the bean curd cubes are falling apart. And Kinry is genuinely embarrassed in this moment, which is an indication, I think, of how protective Kinry feels of the restaurant and how personally he is connected to it. Like, if you are a waiter at an establishment that you don't really care that much about, and somebody comes at you with this kind of complaint, the tendency that most people would have in that position, if you don't really care, is irritation with the customer and a sense of probably, like, you're probably going to be like a little dubious about it. And also just, well, okay, maybe you don't like it, but you don't need to have this kind of attitude about it. But the fact that Kinri's response is embarrassment means that he feels like this reflects on him and his friends and the people that he cares about in a way that he can't accept. And I like that. I like that he seems this invested, you know? So he goes back to the sous chef, and he is the one who had gotten the scallions for the soup, and it's just like, I'm really sorry, but I thought I got fresh ones. And the chef tastes the soup and is like, this isn't right. And she begins to take some things out of it and says, these scallions aren't the ones you bought. See how the cuts are straight across the stem? I never chop them that way. A diagonal cut brings out more flavor. Now, I'll tell you what, kiddos. This is the thing that I had to stop and kind of go, wait, does it? And it made me realize all of a sudden, a diagonal cut simply leaves more surface area exposed. So saying it brings out more flavor, it very literally allows more opening for flavor to come out. And I never thought of that. And I'm sure this is basic shit. You know, if you went to like cooking school, I went to pastry and baking school. We don't get taught like knife skills, things like that. I never thought of this, and I was blown away. And I have like a soup that I'm going to be making with leeks in it soon. And I'm like, low-key going to try this. Okay, note to self. And also mentions these bean curd cubes are much too big, not the way we do it here in the kitchen. Something isn't right. And later on, this guy is eating fish, and he lifts a writhing body of a worm out of the fish, allegedly. Now, Kinri does something here that is not super smart. Firstly, the thing that I immediately thought for a moment was that he was holding up a live worm, and probably you could point out that the fish had been cooked, and how is the worm even still alive if it was in the fish? And then I was like, oh, but with the culture we're dealing with, raw fish is probably served pretty commonly, so maybe this wouldn't be out of the question. Secondly, though, Kinri decides to kind of confront this guy and ask him to shake his sleeves out with the insinuation that he is putting things in the food. And he does this without really being like, he is told this is going to be tricky by Lodon, who I think is like sort of the floor manager. And he jumps forward and makes this accusation without a say-so from Lodon, who I think is experienced enough to know that you don't come at a customer the way Kinri does here. And he is motivated by his feeling protective. So this dude who is prepared shakes his sleeves out and nothing happens. And then has a whole other bone to pick about how he's been insulted and how these people have been taught to question customers and accuse them of being liars and cheats. And Lodon finally comes over and kind of whispers to him, essentially, how much will it take to get you to go away? And he says 20 golds, and she's like, that is insane. And he says, you want me to keep on yelling? You'll lose a lot more than 20 golds once the name The Splendid Piss Pot sticks. I promise you that. So she goes to see the manager, and it says at the end of this little section, a few tables away, the strong man who had saved Dandelion with Kinri gazed thoughtfully at the scene. He took out a few coins, left them on the table to pay for his food, and left. Which I had to say, I felt like probably he wasn't expected to pay for his food because he was a guest, because the Widow Wasu was like thankful to him. But nevertheless, so we have a new scene that sets up, and the way that this guy has played this, he wants 20 golds, and he wants to be brought out one of every of the finest meals on the menu. Let's see. Have the kitchen prepare 10 of your best dishes and bring them to me one by one. Since I'm such a valued customer, I think I'll have dinner here too. which honestly, his initial accusations result in a lot of the people in the restaurant looking at their food and being kind of sketched out. A couple people call for the check and want to leave. But I feel like if you let everyone know that this guy is like going to now sit down and be here for the rest of the afternoon into the evening, everybody's going to really begin to understand what he was after, and that likely this isn't what it looks like. Nevertheless, he is here, like, seated for a minute, and that is why what happens works on him. Now, I am going to assume most readers figured out what was going on here pretty quickly. I don't think this was intended to be subtle, but I am curious, what everyone else's experiences were. Because, you see the strong man squint in this way, looking at him. And then the next thing we know, there is a girl and a guy who are playing Zamaki against each other. He has made a bet that he can't pay and promises that he'll be back. He's going to go get the money. And she's like, don't give me that bullshit. You're going to disappear. You owe me. I'm not letting you leave. And he convinces her to keep the Zamaki board because it's valuable. And as soon as this started, I was like, okay, I see what we're doing here. It's a big con and I'm super on board. I'm very excited about it. So he tells her it's very valuable and he leaves allegedly to go and get the money that he owes her. And the woman is remaining in the restaurant waiting for him, looking kind of uncertain, trying to be busy with the board and cover up the fact that she is really not sure if she's going to wind up having to pay for dinner, and she doesn't probably have the money to do it. And then all of a sudden, Caterpillar Mustache Man tries to sort of insinuate himself into the situation. Tells him, you're never going to see him again. I've been in the world a lot longer than you have, said the man confidently, despite the fact that he looked at most 5 years her senior. I've seen many bad men in this world taking advantage of lovely young women like you. And honestly, this guy makes me want to kill somebody. So she says, mind your own business. If you're going to play me for money, then fine. But if not, I don't want to hear from you. And then he says something about how, I'm guessing you won't be able to pay the bill when it comes. It'll be really sad to see the constables bring a lady to trial for trying to dine and dash. She says, I'll give the restaurant the set if he doesn't show up soon. And he just goes, all right, fine. Sounds like a plan. And she makes a big show of sitting there and thinking over whether she wants to reply. Finally says, if you have something to say, say it. And what it comes down to is that he claims to have a connection that can tell her whether this Zamaki set is actually worth the money that this man is claiming it is worth. And he goes to, first he asks if he can take some pieces with him, but then he says he's just going to make some sketches. And he takes off to get this, he's saying he's going to tell her what his friend says. The truth of what it is he is going to ensure that this board is worth something and then going to come back and tell her it's not. But as he's disappearing out the door, Kinry comes over and says, the man in the blue robe is not who he seems. He's conning us for the meal. The woman looked up at him and smiled. I know. So we find out that this man's name is Tifan Huto. And he is a real piece of shit. So when we're in his POV, it's always really funny to be inside the head of a character like this, because he is the kind of person who fails because he is foolish and arrogant, but repeatedly blames his failures on everyone around him, which I think we have all met or seen people like this. And there is nothing quite as infuriating to me as a person who can't see that their failures are theirs. He really seems to believe that other people just kind of have it out for him or refuse to see his genius. I love this one line. As a teenager, he had suggested that the family buy up the land distributed to veterans from the Chrysanthemum Dandelion War cheaply by first bankrupting the families with crop-destroying grubs secretly deposited into the soil. His eldest sister had summarily rejected that idea as immoral. And just the way that it's said is like, how could she? How dare she say such a thing? Like, it's business. Immoral. What do you even mean? And this is just really interesting, juxtaposed with what we find out about him a little bit later. So he has to do a lot of menial tasks before his family trusts him with a ship. The first time he sailed out on his own, taking a shipment of smoking herbs from Toaza to Dimushi, he saw a shoal of sharks frolicking around his ship as he approached the silkworm eggs. Deciding that this was an omen telling him to sail as fast as possible, quote, as though pursued by a shark, unquote, as it was written in the saga of the hero Iluthan, he ordered his crew to make the passage through the silkworm eggs at night. The captain had objected, claiming it was madness to try to sail through the treacherous channels at night, but Tifon had overruled the seasoned sailor, reasoning the night passage would allow him to get to Dimushi a day before his competitors and make more profit. The result? He had run straight into a fleet of pirates at dawn who boarded his ship, seized all the cargo, and held him for ransom. He knew that his family was going to unfairly blame him for this bit of bad luck. But wasn't it obvious that it was actually his family's fault for not giving him a bigger fleet to command, which would have scared away the pirates? Which I'm desperately curious whether that would have worked or whether the pirates had other guys that they could have called on. Like, you know, his theory here about whether that his theory is give me more people, they wouldn't have dared. And I'm like, would they? Or would you have like lost other ships also? So he takes a gamble, and what he says to them, which is in all italics, I have information. I can tell you the routes and cargoes of the ships of my family's competitors and partners, and perhaps even the routes and cargoes of the ships of my siblings and cousins. You'll be able to pick the most valuable goods and plan the safest attacks. I can also help you find buyers for the goods you seize. There are plenty of customers who'd like to save on customs duties and wouldn't ask too many questions about where things come from. In exchange for these services, all you have to do is pay me a percentage of your profits as a finder's fee and leave my ship, soon to be a fleet, unmolested. And the pirates are just like, what word? So they ask him, they come back and are like, well, we would agree to this, but we have some specific things that we would like. And I want to draw attention to this. Pig iron, saltpeter, smithing tools, manuals on the construction of various engines and machines, perhaps even men and women of skill, toko dawiji good with numbers, blacksmiths, bladesmiths, master fireworks makers, mechanics and engineers, preferably ones with records of inventions. I don't like this at all. We already have our, the Dara side, getting a hold of Garinafin eggs, learning to raise them, figuring out how to use them in combat. It is only natural that the Liuku are going to try and find a way to utilize the same technology Dara has used against them. It was a matter of time. But I don't like that it is happening. And that's, to me, pretty clearly what's going on here. And this is the first time that he balks a little bit, does not like the idea of human trafficking. And the pirates are so contemptuous of his hesitation. And they say basically, well, maybe you don't have the courage to go through with something daring and don't have the killer instinct to win. Just imagining the contempt his family would heap upon him if he were to return to Wolf's Paw in disgrace made his face glow hot from shame. He was not going to be like his foolish older siblings, afraid of seizing extraordinary opportunities. He gritted his teeth and nodded again. And he makes a pact with rooster blood that he drinks with them. And we hear about the fact that there are people with these like clubs and, they're wearing skins and things. Obviously the Yuku who were at this meeting. And let's see, he's thinking about how far he's come in such a short time, coming back to the present. This is the kind of thing that makes me so sad, because it's examples of things like this that make me feel like if you are an honest, good-hearted person, you are never going to get ahead, because the only people who really seem to like genuinely profit are the ones who are willing to do underhanded shit like this. And I know that's not necessarily true, but it really feels like it is the majority of the time. You aren't going to be able to step above and accomplish something truly unusual unless you are willing to trample some people. And I hate that, I really do, because there is a sort of success that we revere in our culture that is standing head and shoulders above all other competitors and really being the household name regarding whatever it is you're selling or offering. And that is the exact kind of success I feel like you just have to be willing to compromise yourself to get. Anyway, so he has gone and gotten an estimate on this Samaki board, and the dealer that he talked to about this has assured him that it's worth thousands of gold pieces to a dedicated collector. And he goes running back, just hoping that the guy who owns the set hasn't come back before he does. So he comes in, tells her it's not worth anything. I really enjoy this so much. She does she sweeps all the pieces off the table in like a moment of pique, allegedly, at finding out that these are forgeries. What we find out later is that one of the pieces broke, and that's how he finds out that it's like a fake, modern set, not an antique like he thought. It's very lucky for her, as she sweeps all these pieces onto the floor, that the one that he breaks is not broken here, because it was a very possible thing. But anyway, he, is like, no, don't do that. I'm sure I can sell it for, 5 silvers or something. And instead of taking the money from him, she thanks him and says, I'm using this to pay for my meal, and gives it to the owner of the restaurant, or not the owner, but like the manager. And I love this moment so much, you guys. I screenshotted it and shared it on my my Facebook. So this cracks me up so bad, you guys. He was very glad to see the woman cry. Vulnerability could be very profitable. Now I want you to be strong and smile for me, all right? There's nothing that can't be taken care of if you smile and remain grateful to the gods. I simply adore men who tell me to smile, said the woman, blushing. I hope that's not too bold, she cooed as she looked up at him. With teardrops on her face, her smile gave her the air of a dew-bedecked safflower. Her sudden swing in mood confused Tifon, who began to feel that something wasn't quite right. But the prospect of profit made him press on. Yeah, I simply adore men who tell me to smile. God, I was listening on the audiobook, and when I got to that line, I paused and opened the Kindle to screenshot that moment so that I could share it, because I found that so hilarious. So she gives it to the restaurant, and now it is left for them to make work of the rest of it. They have to finish the deal, which is wring all they can out of this guy who believes that this board is worth thousands. And eventually they make him pay 50 gold. So they get back more than they were going to have to pay to him. Because reminder, they not only had to feed him all day, they had to pay him 20 gold. So they're getting more than their money back here. And when he tries to say something like, well, do you want everybody to hear about my dining experience today? They're like, oh, do you mean the one where you brought a box of shit into our restaurant and dumped it into the food? And he has a box that has the name of his clan carved in it, which I know there's no way he could have known this was going to be taken custody of, but the fact that his family name is on it so that they can pinpoint not only by face, but also by name who this shyster is, just perfection. Wow, so bad at this, dude. I think we should bring you to the magistrate, said Lodon, her tone no longer breezy. Tifon berated himself for being so careless. Either he had dropped it in his hurry to see the antiques dealer, or the waiters had stolen it from him. No, the woman who, was unreasonably falling all over you swiped it from you, sir, because she is a pickpocket. Good for her. And I just love the fact that it never enters his mind that she was up to something. He still doesn't think that there's any issue here. And when we jump ahead, he is heading home. He gets tripped up, falls over, breaks one of the pieces, and realizes that it is a fake. The servants scattered, terrified, as the man in the stained blue silk robe screamed like a toddler throwing a tantrum. And we go back to the splendid urn. It's after hours and everybody is just chilling and enjoying a drink together and laughing at the way they managed to pull this off. It says Mati and her wife Lodon were hosting a private early dinner in their quarters at the splendid urn to thank the heroes who had saved the day. And I really appreciated we get a little bit more representation of a gay relationship here. And it is mentioned that, because I was curious about this, Kinri says something about how their marriage, which he calls it Rapa, which I believe we have heard before, that it isn't sanctioned by the Liuku. And sanctioned is is a different word than accepted. So I'm curious about whether the Liuku, it's one thing to be we're not going to do an alliance between a couple that isn't going to have any heirs, but another to be we do not allow you to carry on same-sex relationships. And I'm curious whether it's just straight up not allowed, or if it's just kind of well, those are not an official alliance, like a marriage in a legal sense, because so much depended on having descendants. So anyway, Kinri is really feeling wistful in this scene, because everyone is there's such camaraderie here, and the love between these two women reminds him of the affection that he saw at home. And he's wondering how his mother's doing, and just sort of thinking about that sense of unity, that he used to experience the community that he was in. So it turns out that the reason the woman had seemed vaguely familiar to him was because she was the main player in the Ginmazotti play that he had been watching before. And the Zamaki board that they used was made by a woman named Rati, who just makes forgeries all the time. She says, you should have seen me in Gozogi Kade years ago when we managed to produce imitation antiques that fooled the most knowledgeable antiquarians of Dara. Later, when Gozogi went to work with Atharo Ye, imperial scholar, I stayed to manage the gang, but I heard that Atharo was so impressed by our work that he said he wished he could be a thief. And I do not remember if this person was somebody we have met, but I like to think that we did. So they hang around and talk about, let's see, I'm trying to find the spot. Kinry, on the other hand, was lost in thought as he tried to sort out his own conflicted feelings about these new friends. Paid litigator, forger, actors who performed stories that denigrated Peku Tenryo. These were exactly the sort of crafty natives the Thanes back in Ukuta Asa had warned him about. Didn't they demonstrate the hypocrisy and moral corruption of Dara? Yet they had also helped him and his benefactors by conning the con artist. Was what they did really so bad? Meanwhile, we go back to the conversation as they talk about the names that they are using, and the paid litigator who is here, Widi Tukuru, was apparently the one up against her playing Zamaki. And Lodan is asking them about their gang, the Blossom Gang, and is like, do you just drift around? What about ambition? And Wheaty says, some of us were rejected by our birth families, and others lost our loved ones to war or pestilence. But in one another we found mirrors of our souls, trusty companions with whom to weather the storms of this unpredictable world. And I'm gonna have to speed things up a little bit here, but overall, I just really liked this gang being depicted as we have each other's backs and recognize the need for a created family and use our different skills. We aren't explicitly just thieves. We also do our plays and everything, but there's a lot that's they each bring to the table and that they utilize as needed, pretty much. And Kinry is just fascinated by the fact that they all do have these skills and aren't necessarily, any of them, formally educated, and just finds that really compelling. And the chapter ends with one of the kitchen maids coming in and saying Tifan Hutto has challenged us to a contest for the title of best restaurant in Ginpen. So when we go to chapter 35, and I'm going to say this, I'm going to have to rush this. These 2 chapters in the audiobook are 3 hours in total. Chapter 35 alone is almost 2 hours by itself. So this is an impossible amount for me to cover adequately in the hour that I get. Forgive me, but I am going to have to cut some corners. So I just want to prepare you all for that. And I don't like doing it, but it's, needs must. So what we find out here is that he is hiring a notorious chef as the head chef for his restaurant. So everybody has got their spirits up saying, yeah, we're going to take him down. We're going to, we'll prove to him. And then when it's announced Mozo Mu is the head chef, the head chef for the Splendid Urn literally faints. And they have to resuscitate him, but he can't go back into the kitchen too soon because he is in bad shape. Delirium due to terror was the consensus opinion, possibly the result of overwork. He would need plenty of rest during the next few weeks and should not be anywhere near the kitchen. I could have told him that myself, said Widow Wasu. And she just laments how fucking useless doctors are, which honestly, in a lot of cases, I feel the same way. Mati, as most senior sous chef, was now put in charge of the competition in a week. Looking terrified, she immediately canceled dinner service and took the senior staff with her to the great temple of Lutho to pray for good fortune. And Widow Wasu basically sequesters herself to recover because she is freaking out herself. This is her number one man who is fucking down for the count now. The rest of the staff sat around the customerless tables, whispering in hushed voices. Kinry, rather puzzled by everyone's sudden loss of confidence, came into the street in front of the restaurant to escape the oppressive atmosphere in time and found the Blossom Gang waiting for him. So they are right here. We have the entrance of Dandelion, who thinks that she's pulling off looking like a scullery maid. And Arona, who is one of the Blossom gang and the actress, is just like, girl, I don't know how to tell you this, but you do not look like a scullery maid. First of all, I know you bought that dress from a maid, but that's like her best dress. That's not a work dress. Secondly, you put your smudges of like soot on your face like makeup and blended them and made them balanced. You're wearing the flowers in your hair the way a woman wears jewels, and in a hairstyle, by the way, that is very fussy and not something you would work in. And we get a little bit of a flashback here about how Farah was being handled by Prince Gimoto, who is the one that everybody thinks is trying to kind of usurp the throne and maybe marry Empress Gia. So Farah does not like the guy. She sneaks some like nasty flies into his tea at one point and like manages to sort of calm herself by doing that, because otherwise she can't stand against him. She knows that if she puts up a fight, he's going to hold that up as proof of the fact that he's right and she's not, like, she's out of control, because he's essentially being like, you are making a bad impression, that she is indecorous, that she's flirting too much. She's going to see plays that are inappropriate, just, you know. And it's Lady Soto's idea. Maybe you should live outside of the palace for a little while and get to experience the rest of the world and get away from this guy, and he won't be able to needle you so much. So she's like on board with this and pretty excited. And she is really interested in being treated like a regular person and thus being able to pull off doing things in a regular way a bit more convincingly. So she asks for advice and is really receptive to the feedback she's getting. Not only is her costume all wrong, but she doesn't hold herself properly. The way she speaks is too formal and too educated and precise. Everything about the impression she gives is somebody who is used to being obeyed and who knows that people are going to get out of her way when she steps forward. There is no sense of awareness of the people around her or humility to her, you know? And this is the kind of thing that's really fascinating to watch when you see a person who does clearly move through the world in a certain way and they don't seem aware of the impression that they give. Even the order that she says she gave at the tea house is like full of things that are so out of season and expensive that in and of itself is evidence that she's like just not in touch with the average person. And so, yeah, all of this to say, she is taught that there is a lot to pulling off a disguise that she doesn't understand and doesn't really take into account, and that it's a lot more work than just putting some clothes on. So we jump ahead a little bit to when the 7 states schemed and fought against one another across air, land, and sea. The Tiro kings had not limited their competition to mere contests of arms, but also vied for dominance in every realm of art and culture. And this is how we find out about Zana just making these huge leaps in the culinary arts, because they are not positioned in the right place to be able to compete in music or artwork or calligraphy or anything like that. So they begin, there's this one thing I have to stop here and mention. They were the first to attempt to cook the gigantic deep-sea trench crabs, each the size of a full-grown man. Steaming and frying both turned out to be good methods after removal of the deadly poison found in the gills. And the minuscule worm-glow truffle hearts, which were found deep underground and could only be safely consumed after the fungi had been eaten by rooting pigs and the bitter outer layer removed by passage through their digestive system. Word? They ate something after a pig shat it out? Really? And I am not sure if this is based on something that's a real food, because food is notoriously gross. Like, honestly, if you step back and look at any of the things that we enjoy every day as huge treats, a lot of it, when you think about it, is super gross. So I am not trying to pass extra judgment on this in particular, but it got my attention. And I am curious if this is based on a real thing. Because, I know that there's like truffle hunting pigs. I do not believe, correct me if I'm wrong, that those pigs are allowed to eat the truffle and shit it out, and then they get turned into a delicacy. But correct me if I'm wrong. So, this guy has this incredible reputation of incorporating all 5 senses. And one of his specialties, because it also incorporates sound, is a crust of rice made over high heat. And when you pour a sauce over it, it's described as snapped, crackled, and popped, which is a very obvious, like, hey, this is like Rice Krispies. And I found it weird that Ken Liu decided to just do that. Just do the snapped, crackled, popped right in like the same order. I mean, all right, why not? But overall, the description of this meal is like, it's almost esoteric. There's a point at which I'm like, is this even food? And it clearly is, but it's so removed in a lot of ways from the ingredients themselves. And that's purposeful because he wants people to experience what has been made and not think of the individual ingredients. So often what's in the food isn't even really shared or described. And the title of each dish is very removed from what they wind up with. So yeah, at this point, they have a very clear picture of who they are up against and how talented he is. And this is a genuine, like, this is a threat. And this guy that they are going up against isn't explicitly the same. He's descended from that chef that was in that description, but everyone is taking it as a given that he is going to display the same kinds of talents. So what we wind up with is this idea that we're going to sneak into the restaurant as it is being set up and try and steal some of the ideas of the other chef. Try and also at least see what, like, kind of maybe secret ingredients or, like, whatever secret weapon he's working with. And the way they do this is by the whole, like, Blossom gang positioning themselves as if they are part of an inspection group, which apparently is like quite a thing these days. And it would make sense for a new restaurant that is just opening and getting this kind of buzz. It would make sense for them to be inspected with this kind of intensity. So the Kinri is the one who comes up with this idea as well. And as they walk up to, like, the main area of the restaurant, they are looking around at how extravagant the dining room is. And there is a sense of intimidation because of it. But later on, there is something that winds up happening that I thought was kind of interesting. So we have them, like, convincing these guards that this inspection is happening, and eventually going down into the basement, and there is this, like, really, really rare giant mushroom that is being grown. And that is its own kind of big deal, that this thing is here. But there are also a lot of other ingredients from far away. And I believe it's Dandelion who begins to zero in on the fact that what this restaurant is doing is really leaning on a sense of opulence and luxury and bringing in of rare delicacies, which does not actually contribute to the local, I think this is what is going to be the focus, the local economy. They are not buying fish from nearby and paying local fishermen. They are having things flown in at great expense with airships and stuff like this. So she doesn't like get too far into that here, but I believe that this restaurant being so elevated that it is not really rooted in the community in any real way is going to be what they kind of exploit and lean on, that their food is based on local customs, local ingredients, supporting local merchants, that kind of thing. And that it is going to be very evocative of things that are comfort food for the people nearby, and not these, like, you know, basically what it sounds like is we're tickling molecular gastronomy a little bit with what he's trying to do. So this all is like, I was really enjoying all of this. The ways that they are able to convince the guards that this is a real inspection, and just how convincing it all is. As somebody who used to work in food service, this all feels like, yeah, genuinely, I could see the manager of different places I've worked reacting this way. You would take their word for it. I mean, there's just no reason not to. If you put up any sort of fight against it, it's always going to look bad for you, you know? So let's see, I'm trying to find the spot where this whole thing happens, because they get brought down into the area where this giant mushroom is. And this isn't supposed to be something that they notice. What the staff has done is put up these like folding dividers that are meant to screen the area where it is and keep it from being seen. But they've done a sort of sloppy job of it. And that is how, you know, she notices that they're like crooked over here, and it reveals this ingredient that's a pretty big deal, and not, you know, something that maybe isn't even strictly allowed, if I remember correctly. I'm trying to find the exact spot where this happened. Let's see. I'm trying to find the spot where she notices this. He intends to use this area to store some valuables and earnings from the restaurant. And she heads out. Oh, that's right. Because he doesn't even want her out in these tunnels at all. And they take off and are like completely disappeared for a little way. At this point, he asks which way they should go. And Gifi says left. And Rati says, then I think we should go right. They arrived at a storage cellar, dry and cool. And let's see, move the torches away. The statue glowed in the darkness with an inner light. This is a homunculus mushroom. Look at the size, how perfect the features are. Master Huto was willing to spend a lot for the best ingredients. He wanted to keep these here as a surprise. The problem isn't the willingness to spend, but there being no legal market where the supply can be found. And evidently, since the Liuku conquest of the two islands where these were cultivated, high-quality homunculus mushrooms had been almost impossible to find for sale. A whole storeroom full of such mushrooms would likely have required access to smugglers or pirates. And he is trying to be like, no, you can see the shipping stamp here and the supplier and where it's all coming from. And when he turns around, they're gone. And it turns out they go down a bunch of other tunnels, but then they like regroup somewhere and act like they've been waiting there for him the whole time. But what it turns out they have discovered is that there is a ton of tunnels and secret rooms all underneath this area in this restaurant. We found strange accounting ledgers written in code indicating deals that were not meant to be intelligible to anyone who didn't already know what they were about. And there were rooms intended to hold people instead of goods. And this one guy says, there was another room with a sealed door. I went up to it and the stench made me suspect it was a latrine, though the odor was a bit odd. I can't quite explain, but it smelled different. And that I'm really curious about. Like, you know, I'm expecting that this has to do with the human trafficking, but if the latrine smells weird, maybe it just has something to do with mining. I don't even, like, or maybe they're using fertilizer, because we know that fertilizer was used in the explosives, and maybe that's something that's, like, gotten out there. All of this to say that I am surprised that Hutto is, like, operating all of this in his own establishment. I'm not sure that the restaurant is made just to be a front for all of his other operations taking place here, or if he was going to do the restaurant anyway as like an investment and it seemed convenient to put everything in this one spot and have the, you know, tunnels for all of the pirating happening in the same place. But either way, it is bad news for this guy that these people have found what's going on and they don't even know exactly what's happening, but there's enough here to be a real issue for him. And there's a moment that I thought was interesting where Kinri asks them, how did you guys get out of there in time? Like, you know, they've described it more than once as a maze. And Rati says she laughed and patted the arms of her wheeled chair. The Blossom Gang has some secrets we'd rather keep, but a maze like that? Ha! It's nothing. And I'm wondering if she did something like the fact that she patted the arms of her chair. I'm like, is there something in the cushions that, like, she's, you know, like leaving breadcrumbs, you know, some sort of powder that falls that she can follow? I don't know, but I'm really curious about it. And Kinri is like thinking about this and the cart that was apparently moved by that bird in the cage. And he still doesn't know exactly how they made that happen either. And, you know, Kinri is somebody who thinks a lot about sort of engineering stuff. And yeah, this would be very interesting to him. So I'm looking forward to him figuring out some of how this works. And let's see. I'm sure with a little research we'll be able to crack these riddles, said Weedy. And I'm sure we can figure out what kind of story they intend to tell, said Dandelion. Once we know the story, we can come up with our own story to counter it. The gang returned to the splendid urn, ready to meet with Mati and to come up with a plan for the contest in a week. And I'm pretty sure that the next chapter, we are not going to get the, like, summation of what's going on with these two restaurants. And I'm really sad about it. I'm just going to say that right now. I really, really, really want to find out how this goes between them. It's only chapters 36 and 37 next week. So maybe it'll be in there, but I just have a feeling that we're going to depart from this for a while and not come back to it. And I'm just like, I just want to know right now, please. And I know that there was someone who was earlier in this book talking about trying to collect people who are inventors and whatnot. And I can't remember if it was Tanvanaki or Goztan, Ryoto. I feel like it was one of the Liuku. I don't think, but somebody was specifically looking for folks who have these kinds of education. Or maybe it was a request from, was it Rin Koda? Is that his name? The one that's like essentially a huge traitor to Dara. This is going to drive me nuts. But yeah, Kyle, if you're listening to this and you're able to like hit me in the Discord or something and let me know. I remember a person talking about how they were going to try and find talent, basically. And how this was like low-key happening already. But I don't remember who the conversation was between. Anyway, okay. I'm going to wrap up here. But yeah, thank you very much, Kyle, for commissioning this. These were really nice, like lighter chapters that gave me a little bit of a break, and I feel like I'm ready to get back into the heavy stuff next time. Just nice to, give a girl a fucking moment to breathe. Thanks, Ken. All right, everybody. I will see you very soon with a new episode, and until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.